All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to our live video, our lunchtime training here this afternoon. What I want to do right now is bring on Kara, who is actually an educational resource here from Cyrex Labs. So here is Kara. What's going on, Kara? How is it out there in Illinois this afternoon?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, especially to talk about such an important topic.
Awesome. Yes, thanks for joining us, Kara. It's an honor and a privilege to be talking with you here this afternoon. Did you have a good weekend there? Happy belated Mother's Day to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful. Yes, I'm very blessed with my two boys. So it was a great weekend. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, again, we just appreciate your time this afternoon, Kara. I want to get right into it. And again, guys, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to put those in the chat box below. But something that I often hear from our patients, Kara, is, again, we're doing their chiropractic care here at the office. We're working on their back. We're working on their spine. And oftentimes, we work through like a musculoskeletal condition. We help them get better, whether it's their hips, their back, their neck, headaches, things of that nature. But as you know, all of this stuff really is connected with regards to how your body feels physically, with how your hormones are working, with how your immune system is working, and then how we interface with our environment, with our food especially. So I really wanted to talk to you today about specifically food, because I know we can talk about all sorts of things with regards to pathogens and chemicals and you name it. There's lots of things out there that can be adverse to our health. But food is a big one, especially these days when our food is manufactured. A lot of our food is not quote unquote real food, and we have these real side effects from long-term exposure to something that we might be sensitive to or allergic to or have a hard time metabolizing really. Oftentimes I've heard of people say like, yeah, doc, I saw this test on the internet. Always a red. It's like, yeah, doc, I saw this test on the internet and I wanted to test to see if I had an allergy to or a sensitivity to gluten. I would say that's a pretty common one, right? So I want to know if I'm sensitive or if I have celiac disease or something like that, And I don't want to discredit, Kara, just like the real pathology that could be going on here. So again,
Right.
celiac disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, diverticulitis. I mean, there is some real concerning pathophysiology here. And it's good to rule some of that stuff out, like kind of that worst first kind of thing. So, if we do have those serious pathologies, that's like a different treatment path or plan, if you will. But for the person who's maybe been told one thing or another, or maybe they've suspected something, I just really want to help educate people that there's a better way of testing that is related to their immune system, which gives them so much more relevant information. So tell you what, I'm going to stop talking now and just kind of let you take it from there. Tell us more about, what you're seeing with regards to food, and let's start to connect this back to the testing here in just a bit.
Okay. Well, you mentioned some very serious conditions that could be affected by food or could be affected by your immune system attacking your body. And in many cases, the foods we eat, as you mentioned, they're not the same as they used to be. Gliadin, gluten, it has chemicals attached to it. Now, our bodies respond differently. There are so many foods that are modified these days. If you think of imitation crab meat, for example, it has a very small percentage of crab meat, but it has many other ingredients in there that your body may not necessarily recognize when it's in that state, when it's all put together. So that's why it really is so important when you're doing food testing. You definitely want to use the highest quality test on the market, because no one wants to get a test result back. Let's say maybe it's a cheaper test or you could do it yourself, but it could have 40 foods on there that it says you're sensitive to. That's a lot. That's pretty life changing. And if you don't have a true sensitivity to that food and you think you do and you avoid it, that changes things. And so that's why when you're doing this type of testing, it really is so important to use the highest quality test out there so that you can get accurate results, because none of us want to be told, here are 40 foods you can't eat.
Right, right. Yeah, so again, going back to the example that I was lamenting about, and I'm just going to go ahead and name names. I mean, I think the ALCAT test or even the Everlywell test, very popular tests. I mean, they do a phenomenal job with their marketing, and they kind of really convince the individual that this is going to tell them, what they're looking for. But I'm here to argue that it's not really telling you the information that you're actually trying to figure out in terms of, is this food causing the symptoms or the problems that I'm having, or even causing an inflammatory context that can lead to the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, which I think are becoming a much more popular household name these days, as we look at our immune systems with the COVID virus out there, and just the natural sequelae of things. But again, I just really feel like the methodology of some of these tests out there, where they're basically taking your blood, right, and they're kind of filtering out your white blood cells, which are your immune cells, part of your immune system. But they're just exposing your immune cells. They're just exposing those white blood cells to these particular proteins, seemingly in like a willy-nilly kind of way. Just like, okay, if you have a positive reaction, then avoid this protein or this antigen, and like that's kind of it. So on the one hand, it's like, okay, cool. Maybe you have a reaction to gluten, like in that moment from that white blood cell exposure. But what does that tell you about a longer term perspective in terms of time? It's like, what is your body doing over long term time? And you really can't get that kind of information, or like, what is your immune system doing over a longer period of time? And in order to get that kind of information, you need to be looking at the immunoglobulins for their presence or for their absence. With regards to this kind of thing. So further comments on that for us, Kara.
Absolutely. The type of testing that you were talking about is called cytotoxic testing. And so, what happens when a food antigen is introduced to the cell can change size. And some people believe that that's not a good thing. The cell is going to tell the body to attack. But the cell can change size for many reasons. It could change size because, let's say, it's exposed to lemon and the acid in lemon makes it change size. Or there could be fungus or mold on the antigen, which makes the cell change size. And the cell is actually consuming itself at that point. A cell can change size and then tell the immune system, you know what, I think that food's okay, let's leave it alone. Even though it changed size, it doesn't necessarily indicate that the immune system is going to have a response.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And then again, that's why I just really want people to connect with this idea that if you're trying to figure out if you're sensitive to a food, if you're trying to figure out if you have an allergy to something. Now allergies, that's actually something we should clarify, right?
Correct.
So allergies, let's just talk about allergies, right? Because the kind of immunoglobulin testing that my office is doing with Cyrex is specific to particular immunoglobulins. And one of them that we're not looking at is IgE, correct?
Correct. So
Right.
IgE is immediate response. And most people know if they have a true food allergy, they eat a food, they have shrimp or peanuts or whatever it may be, and immediately they respond. So IgE testing is important, but in most cases, people are already aware of what they're allergic to. But a food sensitivity, IgA, which is mucosal, IgG, which is a delayed reaction. You eat a food, 2 days later, 3 days later, something's not right. Your immune system is attacking. And then you may not even know, oh, wait, what did I eat? Was it something I ate 3 days ago or responding to?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's why it's just so important to look at specifically IgG, IgA, and IgM. Those are, or the GAMs essentially is what we're talking about there. That's why it's very important to look at those antibodies, which in and of themselves have particular characteristics that give us so much more information about what your body's immune system is doing than just, like you had mentioned, you called it, it's the cytotoxic
Cytotoxic
the
testing.
cytotoxic testing, right? Gosh, there are so many different directions to go with this. I also want to really point out that when you're testing antigens, when you're testing proteins, specifically food, okay, and Cyrex is big on this. Food is so complex in the sense that temperature changes the protein structure of the food, right? So like
Correct.
take broccoli for example, right? Are you always eating raw broccoli? Or do you ever have cooked broccoli or steamed broccoli, or like, because that temperature, or even meats, for example, the proteins in the meats are going to change. Correct me if I'm 118 degrees Fahrenheit. Is that it?
Correct. The antigenicity of food changes at 118 degrees. And so it's really important to test foods the way you actually consume them, raw, cooked, and modified. If you think about it, most people, I've heard of some exceptions, but the majority of people, I would say, do not eat raw chicken. But most food labs, pretty much all food labs except for Cyrex, are testing raw food protein. It's not the same thing. The antigenicity is different. That's why it's so important to test foods in the state that you actually eat them, even modified. Think about pickles, for example. You could be fine with cucumbers, fine with dill, but once they're combined and they're in a different brine or medium, you could have sensitivity to that.
Right. Yeah. So again, whenever I talk with someone who's done the AllCat or the Everly Well, or pick your favorite internet test out there, and again, I don't want to come down too hard on this, because people spend a lot of money on these tests, and they're just trying to figure things out. But it's like, okay, let's say it comes back, rainbow color chart, which is all, there's lots of different colors, so you remove those antigens, but let's say you remove those food proteins. Again, number one, we don't know if those are raw, if those are cooked proteins, if those are, like you said, there's modified versions of some proteins out there. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that oftentimes you've heard this a lot, Kara. It's like, okay, doc, I've removed the food, and yeah, I felt better for about a couple weeks, but then I started eating all this other stuff that like was negative on my chart, but now I'm starting to feel bad again, you know.
Right, right,
So that's telling you that the underlying problem is not necessarily the food. It can be that mucosal barrier. It can be that leaky gut syndrome or that intestinal permeability, which we'll get into here in a second. It can be your immune system is attacking certain things or is responding to certain things, and then you're just mounting a new immune response to now the foods that you are consuming versus the foods that you were consuming. So
right.
it's like retraining the immune system so that you can
Correct.
eat whatever you want, because we're designed to be omnivores.
Right.
That
We
makes
see
sense.
that a lot with gluten sensitivity as well. It's really interesting. People will go on a gluten-free diet and they'll initially feel better for a while and they think this is great, which it is if they're sensitive to gluten. But they may not even know it, but they could be having cross-reactive situations with foods that cross-react with gluten. And these are very common foods, things like cow's milk, casein, rice, oats, yeast, corn. They all cross-react with gluten. So someone goes gluten-free, but they don't realize that every time they're eating rice, their body thinks they're having a bagel. They're still getting that same response.
Yes.
That's why it's so important to test a wide variety of foods.
Yeah. Okay. Can we talk about that now? Basically, what I hear you saying is like cross reactivity
Correct.
and molecular mimicry.
Correct.
This actually plays a big part into the coronavirus. Actually, just brief aside, I was doing some research recently, and the spike proteins on the coronavirus, there are about, so human tissue has about 50 or 54 different kinds of tissue types, when you break it down. There are about half of those tissue types, so about 23, 25 tissue types that the coronavirus it looks similar to, okay? So your immune system can be attacking, or it can be looking for the coronavirus through those spike proteins. But because there is such a molecular similarity, your immune system can see your tissue yourself, but it can think it's the coronavirus. And then so there's your mechanism for autoimmune disease or autoimmunity. Okay, so now your immune system is attacking yourself, thinking that it's trying to attack the coronavirus. So just wanted to put that out there for people. I think there's going to be a lot of, unfortunate issues with people's immune system, specifically from the coronavirus and things surrounding the coronavirus there. But going back to what you were talking about there, Kara, with molecular mimicry and cross-reactivity, if I don't get tongue-tied here, what I'd like to do is actually pull up some educational things for some great visuals. Does that sound good?
Right. So that's going to show cross-reactivity. So if you look at the top, this is a functioning immune response. So gliadin antibody, the reactive situation, the antigen sees, tags the gliadin antibody as it should. Non-reactive, a potato antigen comes along, casein antigen, it's not a right fit. It doesn't fit in the space. And so it's going to leave it alone, which it should do.
Right.
But on the bottom, it will show you a dysfunctional immune response or a cross-reactive situation. So a casein antigen comes along, even though it's not the right fit, gliadin looks at it and tags it as well. So that's where you're going to still get that same reaction that you would get if you were consuming gluten. You may be gluten-free, but because of casein and there's cross-reactivity, you're having that same response. And actually, it's really interesting. 50% of the people who are sensitive to gluten are also sensitive to casein. So there's a big crossover there.
Right. Yeah, so just one more time for this to really sink in. This concept of molecular mimicry, this concept of cross-reactivity is a really big deal, because as Kara was just saying, you can know that you're sensitive, or you can know that your immune system is reactive to gluten or bread or gliadin, which are some of the specific proteins of gluten. But then like Kara was saying, if you consume milk, or if you consume casein, dairy, cheese, your body can see that in this example down here, and because it forms binding sites. You see how it's covering 2 out of the 3 here. That can still be a problem, and then your immune system can mount this immune response, complete with that pro-inflammatory cytokine cascade. And then there is your pathophysiology. There is your mechanism for all of your symptoms, even though you're gluten-free.
Right.
So that makes sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about what's at the top here then, Kara. So if we scroll up to the top for a second. So this is array 4. So this is looking at, so this is a blood test for people to just zoom way out here. This is a blood test. And what we're doing is we are looking at all of these antigens here, but we're specifically looking at immunoglobulin G and immunoglobulin A for these following food proteins, okay? So Kara, can you talk us through more about what we're actually testing here in terms of specifically gluten-associated cross-reactive foods?
Sure. So I love this panel. The foods on the panel I call, especially the gluten cross-reactive foods, I call them the heavy hitters. They're highly antigenic. They're highly inflammatory. They can really damage the gut. And I know we're going to talk about the gut in a minute. So they're definitely foods to pay attention to. But even gluten containing or contaminated foods, different grains, rye, barley, spelt, Polish wheat, instant coffee has gluten in it. They're even finding now that several brands of ground coffee have gluten, which is kind of scary. So you definitely want to use whole bean if you can. But then the gliadin cross-reactive foods, cow's milk, casein, casomorphin, that's an interesting one. That's a opioid peptide. So if you're positive for casomorphin, you really are addicted to casein. Gluten has the same thing, glutamorphin and protenorphin. You are addicted to gluten. But then even foods that are overconsumed on a gluten-free diet. So someone goes gluten-free and they start eating a lot of quinoa or potato to compensate. Either they're eating too much, or it may be something that their body hasn't really had before, buckwheat. And so their body doesn't necessarily recognize it, and there could be sensitivity.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great point. There is a dose response curve here, if you will. So some people, if they're having high quantities of, like you mentioned, potato or millet or oats, because they've gone gluten free,
Right.
but if they start replacing that with all these non-gluten things at very high dosages, like every day, that same exposure, then you can still have a problem with cross-reactivity. That's what we're trying to communicate. Now this test, or this array here, Kara, this is specifically looking at gluten-associated cross-reactive foods. I see over here on the right, it says eggs, raw and cooked. Okay. So this test in particular is not looking at things like we were talking about with the changes in temperature. Like this is not the test to do if we're trying to look at all of the different kinds of nuances with temperature. Correct?
Correct. So this is a great test for your gluten-free patients.
Right.
It's a great test to run along with a gluten panel, and also the array 2 intestinal permeability,
Yeah.
because these type of foods can lead to breakdown in the gut. So it's important to identify them.
So let's say we're actually looking at, like you said, the array 2. So let's say and again, this is getting at like root cause, or this is getting at mechanism, like that mechanistic level of what's going on in terms of the mucosal layer in the gut. Okay, so what we're looking at here, this is a visual of, as it says at the top, intestinal barrier penetration. All right, so let's go ahead. I keep messing up my view here. Sorry, guys. Let's go ahead and just talk through this. These pink cells here kind of lined up side to side. This is the epithelial layer in the gut, okay? And then let's see, I got to move us here. Okay, so what we're seeing here then is we've got penetration on the left-hand side, and you see all of these antigens going right through the cell and then going down into your bloodstream. Okay, so that is called transcellular penetration. All right, so this is one of the mechanisms of quote unquote leaky gut syndrome, right? Now on the right hand side you've got paracellular, so that's going through the cells. So now we're going in between all of these, basically these tight junctions, right? So that's your zonulin, your occludin, your actin-myosin network, okay? And so it's really good to identify which mechanism you have so that you can implement the proper kind of therapy and treatment to actually help this process. Again, this is part 2 of what I was talking about earlier at the top. First is detection of the antigens or of the proteins or whatever's causing the problem. And then second is healing those barriers. So Kara, talk us through more about healing the barriers and talk us through more about what's going down here, even if you want to get into some LPS stuff for us.
Okay, sure. It's so important to look at the gut whenever you do any type of testing. The gut is the brain of the body. It's the gateway to autoimmunity. So you really can't overstate on the left, the transcellular breakdown. So that's the cells have structure. That's the actomycin. Those are the red sticks kind of going across the top that give the cell its structure. When it comes back positive for actomycin, it's that transcellular breakdown. That's pretty severe. Your cells are literally being cut in half. And a lot of times when people have a lot of food sensitivities, we see this type of breakdown. And a lot of their sensitivities could be because these foods are all getting through. These foods could be causing that type of breakdown. We also see on the right the paracellular with the tight junctions, occludin and zonulin. That's going to be your standard leaky gut.
Yeah.
It's still definitely problematic. It's not quite as severe as the transcellular breakdown. That's why you want to identify what your gut looks like and where the breakdown is occurring so that you can know the severity of it. And there's different treatment protocols based on that as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. So again, clinically, this is really important to know and to identify, because this can affect how we move forward with not just removing antigens or removing foods, but actually helping to heal these barriers here so that you can kind of get back to eating the things that are healthy and that you should be able to eat, really. So lipopolysaccharides, what would be the quick 30-second description of lipopolysaccharides for us, Kara?
They're bad. You
I
definitely
know.
do not want to have lipopolysaccharides. Lipopolysaccharides attack all the organs in the body.
Right.
So this would be an indicator of gut dysbiosis. But lipopolysaccharides, in fact, on this test, if you are positive for lipopolysaccharides, you have a 70% chance of also having a leaky brain, leaky gut, leaky brain. So that's why you really want to pay attention to lipopolysaccharides to determine if you are in fact having issues with that, because that definitely calls for attention.
Yep. And again, I want to thank you, Kara. Again, I want to really emphasize what we're looking at here. We're looking at the antibodies for lipopolysaccharides, G, A, and M, actomycin, IgA, occludin, zonulin, IgG, IgA, IgM. So again, I want everyone to, I want to drive this. If you get one thing from this webinar training, it's the importance of looking at the immunoglobulins. Super, super, super important. The immunoglobulins tell you what's going on with your immune system over a longer period of time, not just right in the moment like a snapshot or like a photograph. Kara can probably articulate this even more succinctly, but you need to look at the immunoglobulins to figure out what's going on over time and what's going on with your immune system. That's super, super, super important. So whenever someone brings me their allergy test, I'm always like, okay, I try to meet people where they're at. I'm like, I'd like to look at this, but what is this testing? In my opinion, if it's not testing the immunoglobulins, if it's not looking for antibodies, then it's not really telling you the full picture or all the information. Add to that, Kara.
Correct. And even tests that do look at antibodies. So you had mentioned some of the tests that you can get off the internet. I know there's one, the finger stick test. I believe you can buy it at Target, where you prick your finger and then you smear your blood on the card and mail it in. But if you think about it, when you prick your finger can have bacteria on it. You're smearing part of your tissue on this paper. You don't really even know what's on the paper. And the blood in your finger is capillary blood. There's not a lot of food immunoglobulins floating around in the capillaries. They're in your bloodstream. So even if you are testing, or the lab says they're testing immunoglobulins, by doing the finger prick, you're not getting the full picture. There's not enough there to truly determine what your body is reacting against.
Yeah. Great. Awesome conversation here, Kara. Again, guys, if you have questions about what we've talked about so far or something specific, please drop that in the comments below. We'd love to answer that for you live on our webinar training here today. I want to briefly talk about one more test here, Kara, before we get to Array 10, which is the comprehensive food test. But talk us through a little bit of, this is the Array 3, and yeah, 3, correct?
Correct.
I believe. Yeah, so this is the specific wheat gluten reactivity panel here. So again, let's start at the bottom because it's such a great visual. So here is our visual of the wheat plant itself, or the seed, if you will. So talk us through here. There's all these different antigens. There's all these different proteins that make it's a much more comprehensive panel than just looking at gluten or even gliadin, right?
Correct. So wheat protein is on a lot of food sensitivity tests. And it's highly possible for you to be negative to the wheat protein. Oh, great, I'm fine with gluten. But actually, you can see here all the different components found within that you could have positivity to. That's why it's so important to really break it out into the gluten proteins, the opioid peptides, even non-gluten peptides, gliadin, the lectin. So without testing all of these individual components, you could get a false reading if you're only testing wheat, or you're only testing on the celiac panel, native and deaminated alpha gliadin 33 mer. That's the standard test for celiac.
Yes.
There's an estimate that up to 50% of the population doesn't even make anybody
Yeah.
celiac patients.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. So this one is IgG and IgA, as we talked about the immunoglobulins.
Right.
It's tested separately, which is very important, because if this test comes back predominantly IgA positive, that's a marker of celiac.
Yeah.
So there's different markers of celiac per se that would indicate a person could have celiac or gluten sensitivity on this test.
Briefly talk us through the transglutaminases, because this is super interesting.
Right. The transglutaminases are interesting. The microbial transglutaminase, I always like to talk about this one. It's found in meat glue. It's found in a lot of gluten-free foods. It's an enzyme derived from bacteria. Very, very high sensitivity with microbial transglutaminase. It's found in things like surami, which is that crab with a K. It's found in lunch meats. It could cause a lot of issues in the body. Transglutaminase 2, that attaches to the gut.
Yep.
Transglutaminase 3 attaches to the skin and hair. So let's say you've got eczema. That could be indicative of a transglutaminase 3 reaction. Or even transglutaminase 6 attaches to the brain and nervous system. So you've got leaky gut, you've got leaky brain. Now you've got issues with transglutaminase 6 going up to your brain because your blood-brain barrier is open. So maybe that's why you're having brain fog, or you're having some neurological things start to happen. Yep. It could be indicative of a transglutaminase 6 sensitivity.
Yep. And again, I always remember all the clinicians that I attend conferences with and seminars with. It's like, if you want to really heal the brain, you've got to start with the gut. Like, you really got to approach the gut, the brain-gut axis, the gut-brain axis. Again, like I've talked to you about previously, combining that incredible nutritional therapy with your artful spinal chiropractic adjustments. Now you're pairing the neurology with that nutritional medicine, and you can just get some profound effects there for people. So again, this stuff gets a little technical. I'm not trying to talk over people's heads here, but when people are doing these tests on the internet and expecting to get really good information, I'm not saying that there's no good tests out there. Don't get me wrong. But I just highly recommend that people, do a little bit of research, or gosh, even talk to their doctor, their chiropractor, talk to someone like myself for some more guidance on what they're actually paying for. Because again, we don't want to be just, wasting our money on tests that aren't telling us what we actually are looking for, and actually good information. Kara, let's bring on Array 10 here and look at like we were talking about, some of those differences, the temperature of things. So what we're testing here with the Ray 10, we're testing 180 real world food antigens. We're testing them in their cooked, raw, modified states, if you will. Okay, so right here, what we said earlier, heating food above 118 degrees Fahrenheit changes its protein structure and therefore its antigenicity. So this is one of the main reasons why I highly recommend people consider doing a test like this, because it's just so much more comprehensive. I know we could talk about this all day long. The gum large molecule reactivity, okay? Lots of food products out there use gums as a substitute for gluten to hold ingredients together. And this can be causing your immune system to go bonkers as well. So again, this panel, the testing is just so much more thorough, is a great way to put it, than just your average cytotoxic test. So let's kind of go further down here, because we could talk about this for hours here too. Let's kind of zoom out here for a second. Okay, so here we are, Kara. We're looking at IgG and IgA. All right. And I mean, just look at all the things talking about dairy and eggs first, just look at all these things that we're looking at just in this top little paragraph here. Okay. Cooked versions of egg whites and egg yolks, because again, eggs can come in a variety of different forms. You've got all these different grains looking at raw and modified rice protein. So much more thorough and comprehensive testing than anything I've ever seen before. I know you were talking about the imitation crab, so there's that over there on the right-hand side, the imitation crab cooked. And again, I just had a patient run this, so it was really enlightening to see some of the things that were coming back positive. And out of range there. I want people just to see, as we're scrolling through here, there is just so much that we're looking at. We're even looking at spices. There are all the gums there below the spices, the beta-glucans, the gum guars. Kara, anything that comes to mind here as we're just kind of looking through all these different antigens?
So the gums, you've been talking about the gums, which are really interesting. So there's 7 gums on this panel. If it comes back positive for 2 or more gums on your food test, it's highly possible that you have leaky gut, because gums are very large molecules. And so they could start blazing through your gut. They're opening up to allow other foods to go through as well. So you definitely want to pay attention to the gums.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. But even things like if you had started with the rice,
Yeah.
you could see how many different versions of rice that we looked at. Recently, actually, I ran this test on myself, and I came back negative for everything in rice except for rice endochitinase. And I wasn't even quite sure what that was, but it's actually part of the cell structure of rice. So had I just tested rice, I would think, oh, I don't have any sensitivity, but I am sensitive to that portion of the rice.
Yep.
So that's why it's so important to really break things out into different components. Lectins are on here. So like for lentil, we'll look at lentil protein and lentil lectin. You could be negative to the protein, but you could be positive to the lectin found in there. So it really is a very comprehensive test in what we're looking at.
And so this panel, or I would say all of the Cyrex panels, right, Kara? Nothing is set in stone per se. Like if something new comes out, you guys add it to the panel, correct?
We're always updating and expanding our panels, estrogens, to our wheat gluten panel.
Right.
Microbial transglutaminase, as I mentioned, which is in Miglu. We're the only lab that tests for that. Super high.
Yeah. So as the research comes out, as new science emerges, we're always adding to these panels to make sure we have the most comprehensive, the most information as possible added to these arrays, to these panels, to get people the information that they need and that they're looking for. And so, yeah, again, it's one thing, let's say walnuts come back or sunflower seeds roasted comes back. It's one thing to remove the antigen. But then like we were talking about earlier with some of the other testing with regards to your mucosal lining, with regards to your immune system, it now becomes, okay, you've removed that, but what can we do to heal your your barriers and to actually re-educate and reorganize your immune system so that you're not always having this constant stimulation or the firing of your immune system, which leads to that pro-inflammatory cytokine cascade, which can then cause so many adverse health problems. Oh, that was one thing we didn't talk about yet. So, let's say, okay, doc, I want to do array 10, but gosh, I just don't have the resources to do all of those all at once. Do I have any options to kind of do it, part 1 and part 2? What would you say to that?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
we have one, it's called the 1090. So it's 90 foods. It's a smaller version. And the nice thing about Cyrex is we freeze our serum. So once you get your blood drawn, we'll freeze it for 90 days. So let's say you get your results back from the 1090 and you think, oh, I wish I had done all the foods. We can always go back and add on the other 90 foods. That's the 1090X. But we don't have to do another blood draw as long as it's done within that 90-day time period. We can add on as many tests as you'd like. We just have to do it at the same time. We can only defrost the serum once. That's definitely a nice feature, is that you don't have to have your blood drawn again if you do want to add on.
Brilliant. Yes. Couldn't agree more. That's a great way for people to do it. Gosh, I wish I could just go into all these tangent thoughts that I have, but I wanted to highlight one more thing for people here. So as I pull up the little window here for us, let's see if this will work. So as I scroll down to here, so Kara, this is called the add-on test. So I wanted people to know about this. Again, the context here, Kara, is we've got someone doing a blood test or a serum test, okay? And we want to measure, along with their test that they're paying for, we also want to measure their total serum IgG, total serum IgA, and total serum IgM. And so what I want to communicate here for people is that testing is available. And again, I'm not even aware of another lab who's doing that kind of testing, but we're able to add that as a measurement from their blood test as like a free add-on right now, as a complementary add-on when you're also doing another serum test. So can you talk us about that just here briefly?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so right now, which is fabulous, you can add this to any serum test for free, as Dr. Kyle mentioned. But the GAM looks at overall levels of IgG, IgA, IgM. Just real quick, IgM, that's your body's first response. It's a very short-lived inflammatory marker. IgA is your mucosally related marker, and then IgG is chronic. If you have an IgG response, you know that it's been going on for a while. So this looks at your body's overall levels to make sure that your immune system is functioning correctly, that it's not suppressed in IgG overall, or it's not elevated in IgA overall, but that it's within those normal ranges, which is really important.
Again, yeah, like you just said, super important, clinically relevant when you're looking at this whole picture. Knowing what the total levels of the GAMs are, or the G, the A, the M, can give you so much insight to what your immune system is doing on that kind of zoomed out level, that 30,000 foot view level, and then pairing that with your actual array that's looking at all of these comprehensive antigens is just, in my opinion, it helps me clinically when I'm talking to a patient and I'm looking them in the eye with certainty and I'm telling them, this is why you feel the way that you feel,
Right.
And for a lot of people, just having that certainty, having it on paper on purpose is just a game changer. And then, like I said, pairing that with their neurology adjustments is just life-changing for just so many people. That is basically what I wanted to communicate to our patient community today here, Kara. Oh, one more thing. Let's talk about this here briefly, and then we'll let you get on to the rest of your day. I wanted to show people, or talk through people, how this works on a practical level, okay? So let's start with this one because I have it right here. Okay, this is the collection kit, okay? So you guys, these are free. We have these for you at the office. This is the Serum Collection Kit. If you're thinking to yourself, gosh, this has really made a lot of sense, and I'm curious to how this works practically. So we have the collection kits here for you at the office. They are absolutely free. You can come by and pick them up. There's no charge. And we want the access to the testing to be super simple and super easy, okay? Cyrex will actually even pay for your blood draw if you go to a very specific, if you go to a Cyrex contracted lab, correct, Kara?
Correct.
Yes, correct. So yeah, if you go to a specific Cyrex contracted lab, you can go to any lab you want. You just might have to pay their draw fee, which is usually like $7, $10, whatever it is. But you take your test kit. You do have to pay for your test on the front end. So we can assist with the processing of the payment for the test on the front end. Then you take your test kit with you to the lab, and then the lab does its thing. They draw your blood, and then they send it off to Cyrex for testing and for processing. So that's how it works with the blood test. So nice little visual there for the blood test. One other thing briefly is the serum collection. So I know we didn't talk about this a whole lot, Kara. We might have to do another video training someday. But I love the saliva, the oral fluid collection kit, because it's super simple, it's super easy, and then it gives, if you're like, gosh, doc, I just don't know which direction to go. The Array 14 or doing the saliva test first can be a great stepping stone into like, okay, now which direction do I want to go further in terms of really digging into the meat and potatoes here, if you can track with that analogy. Array 14, the saliva test, is a great starting point, and then it works a very similar way. You just do everything at home. There's no need to go to the lab. You can just do this serum collection right from your home, from the comfort of your home. You just got to gather. How much saliva is it? Is it a couple milliliters?
Yes.
Yeah.
So just basically drool into the
Yep.
to the tube. It may take a few minutes, but
Sure, yeah.
But it's easy, and
yeah, it's super easy. Yeah, but I think a lot of people are, somewhat familiar with saliva testing, ancestry, genetic tests, 23andMe, stuff like that. It's becoming pretty common out there. So great. Well, does that make sense? Is that a good summary, Kara, of the different collection kits that we have?
Excellent. The only thing I would add is you are going to need a requisition form, which Dr. Kyle, when the test is paid for, will generate. That has to go to the lab with the kit. So you'll have to get that from Dr. Kyle.
Right. Yep. So we can give you the physician requisition. We can provide test kits for you, and it is a very simple process. So again, you guys, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to post them in the comments below. Or if you happen to be watching this on the replay, send me a message. We'd love to be a resource here for you. If you have questions about this testing, if you have questions about anything we've covered here today on this edition of our Family Wellness Lifestyle Community Lunchtime Trainings. Thank you again to Kara. This is just the tip of the iceberg with regards to testing. With Cyrex specifically, we've tried to really stay specific to food here, and all of the nuances with food. But we'll probably have to have you back on, Kara, to talk about a lot of the other things that can cause issues with our bodies, other than food. So
I would love to come back. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys. We're going to call it a day here. So enjoy the rest of your Monday. And as always, if this resonates with you, feel free to give us a call or a text at 734-335-0533. You can also schedule your new patient exam online at MichiganFamilyWellness.com. So this has been Dr. Kyle signing off here today for Monday, and you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon.